Hello YouTube, it's Matt here. I'm not a professional plasterer. I'm not a professional boarder, whatever that is. But I am a professional perfectionist. So today I'm going to be coming at you with some tips and tricks for plasterboarding and doing the job correctly. So I have a disclaimer to make here. And I think I've got a feeling actually that professional boarders, if that is a profession, I mean, I'm sure most people who board up walls are kind of multi-trades, or they might be plasterers, they might be just general, like whatever, carpenters, whatever. I have a suspicion that a lot of people who do this for money might watch this video and poo-poo it. They might say, he's gone way too far, you don't need to do all this stuff. Those people, and if you make a comment like that, I'm going to judge you. Those people, I believe, don't have a stake in the quality of the end result. They only have a stake in the quality of their job. By that I mean, you can do a really good job boarding up, but if it doesn't look as good as the quality of the job actually is, i.e. if the presentation's not as perfect, that can have a knock-on effect to the plasterers who come in and they see it. And this is human nature, right? When you turn up for a job and something looks beautiful, like every screw is lined up, everything's been documented on the walls, like where the pipes are behind and whatnot. You know, they've used a spirit level and a tape measure when like actually putting screws in, which is clearly a ridiculous thing to do because you just don't need to do it. But if they turn up and look at it, they're going to think, right, I have no excuse to do anything other than a perfect job. So what I'm saying is they will inherit the degree of perfectionism. There's a higher chance that they'll inherit that degree of perfectionism that has been done before. If you're a professional person who takes money for boarding up, you might think that this, a lot of the things that I'm going to say here are pointless, and you're welcome to express them in the comments. But I'm going to be subconsciously thinking when I read those comments that, yeah, that's fine, but you don't really care about the outcome, do you? And that's where I'm coming from. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Actually, first, I saw a meme on Facebook that made me think of this actually the other day. I'll show it you on the screen now. So, tip one, check what you're working with. You can see here I've got a timber stud wall. It's got foil tape on it now, but you know, you can see that it was a timber stud wall. Why am I using timber and not metal studs? That's for a different video. On this occasion, the actual reason is that this 190-year-old joist, which is actually slightly rotten, yeah it is, had no support on that end. Literally it was unsupported. It's held up by a little angle bracket which had some screws into some old brick that was falling apart. Only applies to this joist, so we're not holding up the whole room. There's no brickwork above it or anything like that, and you can see that the other joists do indeed go into steel. But this needed supporting. Didn't need much support, just needed a bit of support. And I have great faith in what is supporting this whole wall as well. There's steel and very big timber under that. So yeah, so that's the reason I'm using timber studs in this location. That brings with it its own challenges. In fact, I've used timber everywhere on this build for other reasons. I haven't used metal studs. But yeah, using timber comes with its own challenges. So I go regularly to Builder Depot or Lawson's or Hitchcock, and I actually take my big long level, the big boy, the 2440, and I check it for twist, cupping and bowing. And then I only select stuff. I'm the idiot basically, who you can see rifling through bits of wood in the timber merchant because I want the straight stuff. Very few people seem to do that. But I really think it results in an easier life when building stud walls out of timber. I've actually got loads of old timber on site that was used in various kind of concrete shuttering jobs and whatnot. Some of it's actually straight, some of it's really bad. So I've gone through and rather than throwing it out, I've graded it by Sharpie, using a Sharpie pen, giving it 6 out of 10, or 4 out of 10, or 8 out of 10, depending on, you know, how straight it is. And then I end up just using like rubbish bits for noggins and various other bits and pieces I don't need to be straight. Anyway, how are we going to check the wall? Obviously, you're just going to get a level and you're going to put it along the studs, and you're going to really identify, that's a bit shonky actually, that one. Oh no, there's a screw in the way, that's why. If I get that flat on, okay, that flat on, that's better. You can see if we zoom in here that there's no gap. Is it plumb? Well, I don't know if you can see from the angle that my eye can get to, and the phone isn't flush against the wall, so you can't really see, but that is plumb. And then I will be checking that for all of the studs. Obviously I built them, so I was checking it as I went. And then of course you want to check for flat top, middle and bottom, and this is where the problems usually lay. And you'll see on mine we are very good on all of the studs. I'm checking all of them and making sure there's absolutely no rocking of this thing. For higher walls I might go with 4 checks along the height, but that's really important. I would say if you've got a couple of studs that are 2 mil further back than the rest of them, then 2 mil is fine. 2 or 3 millimeters is going to be okay. If you've got a couple of studs that are 2 or 3 millimeters further forwards, you've got a problem, and you're going to have to look at that problem by taking them out, or, you know, heaven forbid, getting the tool out to what do you call that thing? Anyway, the planer, the electric planer out, which is a horrible job, depending on the situation. Yeah, so studs that are further back by 2 or 3 mil, that's fine. What will happen is the plasterboard will pull in, where the screws to the plasterboard are, might actually pull through the plasterboard, which means you won't get as good a join. So you might need to just document it and say, right, do these ones by hand, the screws by hand, rather than using, you know, your automatic tool. Yeah, so that's tip 1, check what you're working with. 2, absolutely don't do any amount of boarding without using one of these. You've seen them, just no question, go and buy one. It'll save you loads of time. When I use it, I'm not very quick at using these. I've seen people go like that. I can't do that. I don't know why. I mean, I can, but like I'd say 50% of the screws end up at an angle and kind of going brrr. I never get dodgy screws that are kind of caught in the mechanism. They always come out fine. But generally what tends to happen is they go, unless I kind of do this, line it up like that for each one, I can't get them in straight. And if they don't go in straight, they stick out. And if they stick out, you can't plaster it. So always, I have 2 tools on the go when I'm boarding. I've got the old impact gun with the dimpler bit on the end, like so. That's the dimpler bit. Lovely. That goes in the pocket whilst I'm using this, and I go not that quick, I'm very, very slow, but still this makes it faster. And then I go over absolutely everything with a dimpler. So you can see this one, I've used the dimpler, it's got that little ring around it. This one I haven't used the dimpler. The reason is because it is sunk to the correct depth. What is the correct depth? That's a good question. Let me just show you this one. That is borderline, but you can see if it pulls the paper in, then that means it has sunk enough. That is borderline then. So I'm gonna just quickly give it a quick dimple, and then you can see now it's got the dimpler mark on it, and I'm happy. But yeah, I go through literally every screw. Again, this is perfectionistic, and I imagine most people don't do it, or maybe they've got better technique with the original tool than I do. The other thing is with this tool, you're supposed to actually hold it here, which is very unintuitive, because normally you kind of hold it here. You're supposed to hold it here because that gives you the push. I find that I can do it one-handed, but I often end up resorting to using 2 hands. What I do is I line it up and I kind of rock it back and forth to find out what's flat, and sometimes that way. And then when I go in, it works every single time. If I'm doing it really quickly and I can't be bothered to do that thing, or I'm up a ladder or whatever, it often goes in at a wonk, and then I have to come and kind of, it's gone at a slight angle, therefore it sticks out. I have to come back with the dimpler. So yeah, that's tip number 2. Tip number 3 is before you put the board on, you document as much as you can. And when I say as much as you can, I've got used to knowing what to document and what not to document. So for example, I don't need to write down anywhere that my wires come straight out of the back boxes in a downward motion, because it's pretty obvious to me. In fact, that's the rules. You can't take them off to the side and then go down. You've got to, you know, this is called zoning. Electricians will know about that. Wires always goes down, so I don't need to worry about that. Generally speaking, in our build, we don't clip wires against the studs. But even if we did, tip 3 is about marking the positions of the studs so that you can get the exact centers. So in this case, I didn't actually need to because I can see the bottom stud. I haven't put plasterboard on that bit yet. But when I put the next bit of plasterboard on, this will come in handy. This is my mark for the center of the stud. And at the top, I have done the same. You can see here, that little mark on any nearby object that you possibly can, you mark. That means that you come along with your straight edge and then you put a line between the two, and that's your centers. I'll just show you downstairs because I've done that on screed down here. So you can see here, there's my mark, for example. And before I do a good job of marking. Like, I will actually properly clear it of dust first, and then I will do a good mark because you don't want that to, you know, fade. Top and bottom, I will mark. And then also in this tip, on the subject of documentation, we're going to show you the wall of death and the wall of shame. This is a wall which, if you put a screw through in the wrong place, it's highly likely you would pierce a water pipe, a gas pipe, one of the millions of electrical cables, speaker cables, network cables, drainage. Yeah, yellow's gas, isn't it? Oh, and then not to mention high pressure sump pipes. So yeah, this bit of plasterboard has come off and gone back on about 4 times, and I photographed it and worked the photos, and I've had to actually take this side bit off as well, just so that I could get the exact locations of the things that I can screw into. So even here you will see it says 24 thick stud. It's not really a stud. 24 thick means the thickness I've used. This is roofing batten. So it says use 35mm screws. I've gone to town with this. There's a really good reason for this. This is, I think, an extreme example of documenting what's behind. See, it says long screws, okay. This is an extreme example of documenting what's behind before you start screwing, but you can see here why it's absolutely necessary, because, well, if I were to take this off, you would be horrified by the sheer amount of stuff that is going on behind here. It really is not something you want to mess up, and this is why I'm doing all the boarding myself. I'm definitely not getting anyone else to do it. And so generally I come and I mark studs where I need a bit more detail with CL, meaning center line, or just C, and then E and E, meaning edge. And then that transfers onto here. And then I've done the same on the other end. I didn't need to here because I could see it in line with that. Sorry, it's this one here. And then I mark it out. This particular one needed a lot of documentation. Obviously you don't need to do that on most. But yeah, you can see the sheer level of detail that is necessary in some situations. This is something which is non-standard. I don't think you'd find this in most builds because most people wouldn't put so many things in such a critical place. But this is something that needs to be, documented very carefully. Documentation of speakers and ceiling lights is a different matter. So the way that I would document speakers and ceiling lights before putting board up is to get a measuring tape and put it to the nearest thing. So on this occasion, it might be this vertical face here. And then I would hold the measuring tape and I take 3 photographs. I take one of the context, which is basically this angle, so I can see where in the building I am. Then I take 2, the second photograph is like closer up, showing the tape measure and what the tape measure goes up against. And then third one is the actual close-up of the measurement itself. So I'd take a measurement here and a measurement here, and then that way and that way from the end or something like that. So on this occasion, it may have been before I put this plasterboard in, but it doesn't matter because as long as I know that I've used 12.5mm plaster or 15mm plaster, or whatever I've used here, I can account for that later. So you might see a photo with a stud here, or not a stud, but a bit of timber here, and that's what I've measured up against. So yeah, that is my tip number 3 about documentation. number 4, should you cut out holes before the plasterer comes or afterwards? So I'm talking about ceiling speakers, big round ceiling speakers and things like that. The answer is a very clear no. You should wait until the plasterer comes, wait for your plaster to set, and then cut your holes when you come to doing second fix. The obvious exception to this is where you've got plaster and fittings like this. So this is a light fitting, which is due to be plastered in. I will be taking the bayonet fitting out before he comes. But yeah, obviously where you've got cables that need to come out without big holes that are going to be punched in later, you need to pull those through now. I've made one exception actually. I'll just quickly show you. Oh, look, you can see our walls and all of the detail and that lovely light fitting. Look at that. One exception I have made is in here, and the plasterer's, I'm going to take this out before the plasterer comes, and he's just going to have to do his best job, and then it's going to be hidden by this bezel anyway. I'm not really convinced that you shouldn't cut holes out before the plasterer comes in, but that's what I've been told, so that's what I'm sticking to. Tip number 5, change your knife, it will change your life. I really mean it. Until about a week ago, I was using this yellow Stanley knife. It was, I haven't got it, I can't show it to you. It was this fold up, retractable Stanley knife, all metal. I've used it for 7 or 8 years, thought it was, just a normal Stanley knife. I had no idea that it was ruining my life. I'm being a bit sarcastic, but you get the idea. Because when I bought one of these, in fact 2 of them I bought one retractable and one fixed. I was resistant to buying a fixie actually, because I'm really fast and loose with knives. I chuck them about, I do this a lot, and I'm a bit clumsy, so you imagine with a fixie I'd just slice my hand open. But no, seriously, I chuck them off ladders. We've got a small dog, she comes onto the building site often. You can imagine that falling off, and if it was a fixie, that would do some serious damage. I'd walk past and leave it on there like that. I was very worried about getting a fixie. I've ended up using this fixie over the last week actually quite a lot, because the reason I was worried is I thought, oh god, it's going to take it takes too long to change the blade, because I've got one of these old ones, and I thought, god, you've got to get a screwdriver out to change the blades, right effort, the whole mechanism falls apart, and then you've got to put it back together again. That's why I didn't get one of these type of knives. Because you can't change the blade here without undoing it. But how wrong I was. These are fabulous. This has changed my life. Why has it changed my life? Because first of all, it is very, very, very quick to change blades. So I'll show you what I mean. Let it come open. I can do this with one hand. Actually, I'll show you on the fixie version, because it's not so easy to do with one hand. Here it is. Do that with one hand, boom, out, next one in, job done, and you're done. That is a quick blade change. That is a quick blade change. Also, it means that I don't need to worry about that whole kind of not retracting the blade thing and the blade staying out and me putting it in a stupid place, because I can actually put it away pretty quickly. I can put it in. I always put my knife into my pocket. I know you can get sheaths. I can't be bothered. I'll just lose them. The only things that ever stay in my pocket are these 2 Pica pencils. 2, because I always lose one. And the tape measure. The vice versa, which is the only tape measure for people who enjoy life. There is no other tape measure for people who like life. And believe me, I've tried. Anyway, that's completely by the by. The Stanley knife with the fixed blade, I think it's called Titan, and the one without, actually, with a retractable blade as well, is really good. Why are they so much better? I don't know. I can't tell you, but I can tell you that I swear a lot less when I'm using them. What else can I say? They give you so much more power, much more cutting power. I think this blade on the fixie actually sticks out a teensy bit further. Here's the dog, thus proving my point. Anyway, change your knife, it'll change your life. 6, tool talk. I'm going to go into a fair amount of old detail when it comes to talking about tools. Obviously, we've talked about the automatic screw gun. For a larger job, it's a must. For a smaller job, obviously, you don't have to have one. You can just use an impact gun or a drill, heaven forbid, with a dimpler bit. This is the standard thing. You can get these on Amazon for like next to nothing. Obviously, we've talked about change your knife, change your life. Yeah, you need a saw. I don't think it makes a difference whether you use a fine tooth blade or a coarse tooth blade, or for carpentry first fix. So it doesn't make any difference. If it cuts, it's fine. They get messed up very quickly on this building site. I don't use gloves because you can't feel stuff with gloves on. Obviously that's for, you know, pre-plasterboarding. Right, the square, the T-square, as far as I'm concerned, for any boarding job, this is an absolute necessity. Yes, I have a carpenter's square. I don't use it for plasterboarding, not in the slightest. I don't know why, that's just preference. You might prefer that. A lot of people will use the old levels as a straight edge when, you know, scoring down the plasterboard. Do you know what I do? Maybe it's non-standard, but this is how I work. I mark it in 3 or even 4 places along the length. I lay the board down and then I just go straight at it with a knife against the edge using this thing, and I have to move it along. It's slow, but it's really accurate. It's the way that I work. Most plasterboarders will work much more quickly and more efficiently than I do, and that's fine. They will score it whilst it's standing up and then break it and go around the back of it and score the back, and job's done, and it probably works fine. But I tend to work to very fine tolerances. I don't know why, it's just how I'm built. Again, that's one of those things that's probably unnecessary. Do I use a scriber? This is a tracer professional construction marker. Yes, I do in plasterboarding. Why? Because sometimes you've got to have things like this where you've got a wall, exposed wall, and you need to plasterboard up against it, and yeah, that needs scribing. Obvs. I sometimes use the little mini square. So if I'm cutting in a back box or whatever, and I've got like a couple to do, I just use it to repeat the measurement along the side. When does the mask come out, the JSP force feedback mask? This comes out quite often actually, and it really should be kept in its packet because that's where it will remain dust free. Yeah, the mask comes out quite a bit actually, because when especially when I'm tidying up, actually it comes out more when I'm doing this kind of stuff. But it's really useful if you are using that tool, which is very messy. What's it called? Do I have it here? Here it is. This is the shavy thing, also known as the Stanley Shoreform. Is that Surform or Shoreform? I don't even know. 21.399 is the model number. So yeah, when you're doing that above your head, it knocks out a metric cacton of dust into this little hole, and then it kind of shoots out of the hole. And obviously when your face is underneath it, you can't stop it going in your eyes. Well, I suppose you could wear glasses, but you definitely want to stop it going in your mouth and nose and lungs, ideally. So, you know, most of the time I don't wear this when I'm plasterboarding, but at the end of the day, I will maybe clear up, believe it or not. I might even use this thing here to kind of blow some stuff around because it's just quicker. Like this, see? It's great. Dust the walls down like so. That kicks up a bit of the old dust, so this goes on at that point. What else? So yeah, so what do we use this Shoreform for? I use it to knock back edges so that they match here. Actually, if there's a profile, what do you call it, a beading going on, you might want to step that back even further, but that's for a different matter. And then I use it to sometimes clean up the edges just so it looks nice. Might not be necessary really, but I do it anyway. And that leaves you with, I mean, it certainly is necessary if you've overshot this by too much. You don't want that sticking out. You do want it at least flush, if not further. But that does leave you with this dodgy kind of residual paper edge, which I then come along, and you can see here, I've cleaned up using a knife. So you've got 2 angles when you come down with a knife. This is a bit that I haven't done yet. This is the bit I have. You've got this angle and you've got this angle. And by adjusting those 2 angles and making sure that you use a brand new sharp knife, you can just go one slice down. It's a bit like wrapping presents. You know, those people who use the scissors without actually doing that. They just go, and if you get it just right, the angle just right, you can do it quite quickly. So I do that. It's kind of worth it. What other tools do we use? Let's talk about screws. Here I'm using the DeWalt 35mm coarse. So I'm going straight into timber all the time on this build. So I'm using coarse screws, and I'm using either 35 or 45. So I've got lots of these boxes somewhere downstairs, and they look like this. These collated screws, they're expensive, but if you get them on deal or you look on Amazon on a regular basis, they sometimes drop their price. I managed to get some of these for like 11 quid. A pack of, what is it, 1,000, I think? I think it's a pack of 1,000. Anyway, you just go online and you just find the cheapest price. It's often at Amazon actually, but not all the time. They drop their prices from time to time. You can use other brands, obviously. This is what I've used so far. I found them at actually the best price on eBay and Amazon, and I use them, and they've been completely consistent and reliable for my purposes. So yeah, 45 and 35, general rule of thumb. Oh, and I also have packets of them for doing manual screw work as well, because I don't like to waste the slightly more expensive versions by taking them out and then putting them in the impact driver. I have these on the go, and what I use is I have 38mm, which gives me a bit of variation, a bit longer than that, and then also I use quite often actually 25mm ones. This is where I need to make sure that the screw does not go too deep. And that's critical in some situations, certainly with me. But as a general rule, I use the longest screws I can. I probably don't need to. You're supposed to go in double the thickness of the thing that you're screwing into. So, for example, if your plasterboard is 12.5mm, technically you'd only need 25mm screws. But, you know, the way I see it is a longer screw is better. Tend to only use the 45s, that said, on ceilings and where I want additional feeling of security. I don't think it matters. I think 35mm are probably the ones to shoot for most of the time. So yeah, that's screws. I use one of these jigsaws with a wood bit on it actually sometimes when I'm doing cutting out scribies like this, just to get quick changes of angle as well. So that's the jigsaw. So I realised I didn't do a show and tell of my jab saw. The one that's pictured here is not the one I've got. This one's got some fancy red knob in the middle. I guess it's a folding mechanism. Mine doesn't fold. Mine is pretty blunt actually, and they're really lethal if you accidentally have your thumb in front of the blade and you slip and you slice down onto your thumb, especially with a blunt one with plasterboard dust all over it. It's a really nasty injury, so don't ever do that. But the purpose of these things is it's got a sharp end, so you basically stab into a flat piece of plasterboard and then you can twist to make a nice hole to bring wires through, or you can use that to start a cut in a certain direction. So for example, I use it when cutting back boxes in. I actually score the lines with a Stanley knife before I do cuts with this thing, because it makes it nicer. You get a bit of a jaggedy edge if you just go straight in with this thing, so I score it first with a knife. But yeah, that's the jab saw. The final tool is, of course, the humble tape measure, but this one's not so humble. In fact, this is the only tape measure I'd use. I own in excess, I think, of 25 tape measures in total. Lots of different models in that selection. I use them for different things, but really the one that I use most is this Vice Versa 5 meter. This is not going to be a full review, but suffice to say, without it, I'd be really upset. As in, if this went off the market, I would really, really want to find another one that's exactly the same. Benefits are that it's metric only. Sorry, Americans, but we only use metric here. And the benefit of that, why would you not want two different types of measurement, I hear you ask? Why is it better to have one than two? Surely two is better. No, one is better because it gives you the readings on both sides of the tape, which means that when you're, doing it that side, if you need to mark on the left side of the tape rather than on the right side of the tape, or vice versa, then you can, because the measurements are on both sides. It sounds very simple, but it's a real kind of game changer if you're used to using, you know, dual measurement, like, you know, inches and centimeters, or inches and metric. Imperial and metric, most of our tape measures on the market in this country have both. You have to kind of go out of your way a little bit to find metric only, but my God, I think it's really worth it. And, you know, if you need inches ever, just reach for another tape measure. That's fine. But I never do. This is perfect. Oh, and the other thing is it's got measurements on both sides, and the hook goes kind of both ways. So you can hook it on that way. You might think, again, why is that useful? You're never going to do that. But actually, when you're measuring something up above, it's very useful to be able to hook it this way round and not this way round, because it's more likely to flop out this way round than it is this way round, right? So actually, if you're holding it this way, it's going to go like that. But if you're holding it this way, it won't go as easily, and that means you can still read it from below. So it's fabulous. Oh, and below you've got measurements on both sides as well. So yeah, it's double good. It's quadruple good. Get this tape measure. Do I use the 8 meter version? It's a bit bulky for me. I've got the 8 meter vice versa as well. I don't really use it. The 5 meter does most things, and if I need to measure more than 5 meters anyway, I'm going to get the laser measure out because it's just more convenient for me. Vice versa tape measure, highly recommended. Okay, so I expect you all might know how to cut plasterboard, but here's my kind of my way. First of all, I bring the plasterboard sheets in and I rest them on at least 2 bits of plasterboard, or maybe a 2x4 on one end and a 2x4 on the other end. And the reason that I do that is because when I'm getting this tool out here, if I put it down, oops, I put it down on there, it actually overhangs the bottom of the board, okay? And so, yeah, by lifting it up, you're supposed to do that anyway, because you shouldn't store plasterboard on a floor for reasons of moisture and whatnot, and also it scuffs. But B, it's actually useful because that means this can go flat against this top edge, which is great because then you get the Stanley knife out, you know, you get your measurement like so. If you're cutting this way, measure to here. Let's say I'm going 76, shift it along a bit, like so, line it up, get my Stanley, knee goes there, and I just go hard, moving my hand down as I go, and then, yeah, you remove that. You've got your score on this side, you pull the whole lot away. This is paintboard, so it's annoying and heavy. Pull the whole lot away and just shove your hand on the back like a karate hit, and it breaks, and then you score the back. And you know, you've all seen the tips about how to cut plasterboard. When you score the back, you don't need to go hard. You just need to tear the paper so that when you kind of crunch it or something like, you know, when you snap it, it doesn't tear the paper. That's the idea. It should kind of snap itself. If you're doing a cross cut, a lot of people do the method where they hold the knife up against the measurements like this, and they go, and that's how they get their cross cut, you know, lengthways cut. I can't do that. I'm just no good at it. Also, I seem to be working to higher tolerances to most people. I want 213 millimeters, for example. Whenever I do that, I get like 211 or 215 or something. So generally, when I cut lengthways, well, it depends how much of a rush I'm in. Sometimes I might come and make a mark here. So I'll get the tape measure out, comme ça, make a mark here with a very sharp pencil, 213, another mark here, 213, another mark just past the centre line, 213, and then one at the end. What that enables is I can then come along, do this, get the knife, I'll hold it kind of here, pulling this so it doesn't slip, and I'll cut along here, and then I'll flip it over, and I'll do the other cut this way. I don't know anyone who does this way, so this is not my advice about how to cut. I'm just kind of telling you how I do it. You find your own way of working. Everyone's different. But that's how I like to work. Most of the time in this stupid build of ours, I'm going to just take off the stand. We have walls that are not straight. I don't know if you can see this. This wall actually comprises 2 different walls. You can see there's a join here, and it changes angle there. Can you see that? Nothing in this build is straight. Literally everything is wonky. It's an old building. There are walls that, I mean, can you see this wall here? It's not very pretty this, but this changes direction. Can you see that? So whenever I cut, and you've got all this kind of detail up here, whenever I cut, I take a long time to cut boards. Now, I know that a lot of new builds, the standard height is 2400 or 2.4 meters high, and you just need single board, come along. People don't faff around with cutting shapes in their plasterboard like I do. I tend to, have I got examples of shapes that I cut? I mean, all this kind of stuff is shapy, but it's not really a good example. I can't really show you examples. Yeah, here's an example of shapes that I've cut. I mean, getting that piece right up and down a few times to get it perfect. And on the other side, it looks like this. It's way over the top. But when I see people who say, oh yeah, we get like, you know, this many sheets done in one day, I think to myself, God, you're either a genius or you're not doing the same kind of things as me. Anyway, that's kind of my musing on the subject. Your mileage will vary, and that's fine. This is how I do stuff. When I need to cut shapes, I get the board out on the floor and I mark and I measure and I write down. In fact, I will go and I will plan the shape, whether it's an L shape or whatever it is. And I'll draw it out and I'll measure 3 times. I'll transfer it and then I'll cut with a knife, and then I'll generally get the saw out and go along the knife cut. The Stanley knife cut. The reason I cut with the knife first is just to give me a mark, because it's better than using a pencil, and also to give me the cleanness of cut when it's finished. Depends how much I can be bothered, but often that's how I do it. That's, I guess, something that people don't teach you. People might disagree with me on this, whatever, that's absolutely fine. Let's go back to basics of cutting board. So you've got that way cut, you've got that way cut. What a lot of people do is they go along with a tape measure, as I've said, and then they will snap it back that way, and then you kind of go behind it and you use your knife to cut the paper, and then you grab the sheet, put it on the side. I can do that successfully, not very easily standing up, but I try to do it all with the board standing up because it is a bit easier. If I just need a small amount of plasterboard like that, you don't want to cut all the way across and, you know, have so much wastage. So I will score along here and score down here, and then I'll pull this away. I'll use this saw to do the first one, and then the next one I'll snap it by kind of folding it back on itself. That's the kind of standard way of doing that, I'm pretty sure. So yeah, once you cut your plasterboard, you hold it up and you screw it in. That's pretty much it really, isn't it? Except for there's some other detail as well. How much space do you leave under your plasterboard? A lot of people say you should never plasterboard all the way down to the ground. I can't remember the reasons. I think it's something to do with moisture from your screed in the meantime getting into the plasterboard, or it could be expansion. Either way, in the majority of situations, you're covering the bottom with skirting board anyway, so you don't need to go down to the bottom. But how much do you leave? I don't know, and I vary between 15 or 20 millimeters minimum to, I think, even 30 or even, would I ever leave 40? Perhaps not. I think about between 10 and 30 millimeters I leave. Unless I know that a floor's going on top and that floor's going to add another 20, and then I'll add another 10 or 15 on top of that. That's my general rule. Generally speaking, I've seen people who plaster not even bothering plastering down to the bottom by like that much. So yeah, go figure. I guess they assume that your skirting is going to be quite big. If you know what your skirting is, that's fine. It's good to get it consistent though, isn't it? So I go like 20 mil above what I think the finished floor will be, and that's what I generally do. What other details can I give? Oh wow, yeah. So do we use Bondit, Megastick or PU foam of any type? The answer is yes. A lot of people don't, and on a lot of these walls I haven't done. For example, this wall I didn't, because I had this kind of slight fear that I might need to remove something at some point. These walls are block walls, you can see. And so these boards have gone on with Bondit Megastick. I'll show you what it looks like. It's PU foam. And basically I get it from Amazon. And it comes in this format, Bondit Megastick. The reason I get this particular brand is because it is very, very cheap for packets of 12 on Amazon. It works a treat. It comes out kind of pink and highly recommend. It comes with its own gun as well and foam cleaner as well, which is really, really important. Because you don't want your gun getting gunked up because they're quite expensive. So you can see on this one, I've only actually used one screws. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Actually, that's quite a lot of screws. 12, 13, 14. Yeah, but I haven't covered it in screws. On this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, but I'm not using plasterboard screws for this, obviously. I'm using wall plugs and wood screws basically to hold it in place while the PU foam sets. I think when I did this as well, I rested the bottom of it on something so I could get it up there to the right height. But yeah, PU foam instead of dot and dab works a treat. Very, very pleased. How much did I put on? And did I apply it to the wall or to the board? I think I went a bit mad with the PU foam and applied it to the wall, and I just went just kind of like everywhere. I'm sorry, I'm not giving a very accurate answer to this question. The good news is that you can, when you apply it, if it kind of squidges out, you can just, like after it's dried, you can just cut it off quite easily. You can pull it off with your hands, but it holds really nicely. How much did I use? Difficult to say. On a wall like this, I would kind of go, maybe let's kind of, maybe I went for maybe 6 times, I don't know. Obviously on joists, joists or studs, you don't really need to use it, but I have been using it on some of them where I want that extra feeling of rigidity. So for example, these are little mini studs. So they're not like full-on 2x2s or 2x4s. Behind here, they're roofing battens, and they taper down because the wall is really out at the bottom. So they kind of taper down to like that thick, which is slightly concerning. So I've used PU foam on the whole lot, and it feels really nice. I mean, yeah, you can hear it a little, but I'm pretty happy with that. When it comes to, again, doing this wall, I'm going to clean it off with a brick brush, get all that rubbish off of it, spray some water on there, and then come back the next day maybe, and I'll PU foam the whole wall up after I've cut everything to the right size and shove it on. So that's PU foam. Great stuff it is too. I'm going to call this tip number 7, and it is respect the fizzing noise. So sometimes, what do I mean by that? Basically, it really happens on ceilings more than walls. But when you are fixing to something which isn't perfectly flat, sometimes where, let's say, can you see the lip on here? That's the I'm going to show you what has caused this. You can see that I have put spacers behind plasterboard. Now, this is a big no. You don't use spacers behind plasterboard. Sure, you can use spacers behind timber to, then give you a nice flat thing to put your plasterboard onto, no problemo. But if you use spacers behind plasterboard, like I have done here, this is a big no. And the reason is, it means that you then have to know that you can only fix where there is a spacer. You can see I've only fixed in 2 places. On this one, I only fixed where I knew there were spacers, and then later I did not like the lipping here, so I thought, I know, I'll pull this one in by fixing here, but unfortunately there wasn't a spacer. So what happened is, sure, it pulled in, but then hear this noise. Can you hear that noise? That is the fizzing noise that I'm talking about. What it basically is it is your screw pulling through the board. Now, the first time I ever put boards up on a ceiling was downstairs actually, and I heard this fizzing noise a lot, and I started Googling it like sugar. Like, what is going on? Why are all my ceilings fizzing? Is this a bad sign? Is there a problem with the plasterboard? I had no idea. Basically, what it is, the fizzing noise just means that you are putting a screw in and you're screwing into something, and it's basically pulling the board further than you should be pulling it. It basically means the board is not going to be flat. It's not a problem if the board is not flat, but obviously if it's hanging off, then the net effect of it is your screw is going to pull through the plasterboard, meaning that that fixing is no longer as secure as it should be. Let's just do that one up there, because that is fine. Yeah, that fizzing. Yeah, this is a complete abortion. This is not what you do. This is not perfectionism at all. Unfortunately, I had a very difficult situation with a ceiling. I won't go into it in too much detail, but I have waterproofing potential future waterproofing issues, because there's a bathroom above and there's I had to install a tray with a membrane. I don't know if you can just about see that. There's a bit of plywood on top of the tray with a membrane that goes all the way across here, and then I've got a water sensor up in here like this, so that if there's ever a leak, the water will fall down this tray above, it'll hit the water sensor and it'll actually turn off the water supply. And I've got a little connection box for that water sensor here, which is going to have a blanking plate on it. Anyway, it's a kind of a weird and dodgy situation where I had plywood and I had to have that plywood, and that was my finish. And actually there's no way of getting like a 1 or 3 or 4 mil space behind boards. The ideal way to have done this would have been to use very long pieces of feathering wood. So that would be 1 millimeter thick wood, which you can get by cutting it yourself using a bandsaw, or using any kind of saw that you can cut, like, you know, really thin wood, and you'd run it along the length so that wherever you fix to, you're fixing to something solid, that it's not pulling the board in by accident. Anyway, we're going to have to basically, with situations like this, note it down. So I'm going to write our Sharpie here and say, you know, this will need bonding out before it's plastered. This whole board arrangement here is basically dodgy. That's not what you want. But I thought I'd show it because it's an interesting example of how not to do something. So there you go. After making this little segment of the video, I've decided I'm going to take that all down and start again because it's not good enough. After banging on about perfectionism, I think it's important to be perfectionistic. Tip number 8, again, is about the knife, and I've talked a lot about knives so far, but always keep a sharp blade. This might be really obvious to some people, but I am one of those people. I don't like changing blades, so I don't like wasting stuff. So I always kind of eke as much out of my blade as possible, and it's actually a really bad idea, because when you have a sharp blade, you can go so much further with plasterboarding. You get much cleaner lines, things go much better, get less stress, get less kind of fewer edges of boards that just look a bit rubbish. So yeah, keep that blade really sharp. I'll give you an example of what I mean here. Sometimes if you cut a board and it's that tiny bit too big, you've got two options for kind of cutting down the, let's say this was the whole board. It's the wrong way around. I wouldn't normally cut it this way around. You've got two options. You can either come at it really close to the edge with a knife, or you can use a multi-tool, or you can use a saw, which involves lots and lots of swearing because the saw always kind of goes off to the side and then you have to kind of push it back the right way. What I suggest, especially if you're feathering, or if you're kind of going to a point. So what I mean by that is, let's say you want to take off 10 mil from one end there and 0 mil from that end, and you're feathering. This is a really difficult thing to do, but it definitely can be done. This is a 15 mil pink board, so it's pretty hefty. It definitely can be done with a new blade and one of these knives. And literally, after I usually put my knee on that end, after about 6 or 7 hard swipes with the blade, that's done the job. And you'll see as long as I'm using a new blade or a relatively new blade, you'll see that the edge that you're left with is super nice. If you do this without a really nice new blade, it just causes a lot of stress and you don't get a nice clean edge. Anyway, that's my tip. Always, always, always use a nice blade. Just keep changing your blade. They're really cheap to get 100 or whatever. So just keep buying new blades and keep changing them. Here's a mini sub tip of use a sharp knife. Sometimes when you do a cut, I've done here, upside down, you get a really nice edge. And this is kind of okay, isn't it? It's not so bad. But sometimes if you don't have a really sharp knife, you've got lots of bits that you want to kind of knock off. Yeah, you can either, when I say knock off, I mean, you know, you want to make it flat. You can either use the shore form, is that what it's called? Shore form. You could either use that and go along it, or if you've got a screeded floor, not like this, there's plywood subfloor, but if you've got a screed floor, like something like that, it's nice and flat, it's got no bits on it. What I tend to do is I just kind of take the board and I just drag it up and down the screed floor a couple of times, makes a nice white mark on the floor, but it comes off. And yeah, that's how I get my edges really nice and flat. Just knocks the bobbles off. Sometimes you get bits of plasterboard left on the edge, and then when you put it up against, e.g. your wall, on the ceiling against the wall, those little bits kind of prevent you from actually getting nice and tight up against there. So yeah, it's always good to knock those bits off. Right, YouTube, that concludes my discussion of plasterboarding. Thanks for watching. It's been a bit bitty, I know. Perhaps it's not the best presented video in the world, but I just thought I'd splurge as much stuff as I know. A lot of it's for my own memory that I do this, like my own vlogging memory, but perhaps some of the things that I've said today will help some people. Perhaps they will cause arguments in the comment section. I'm sure all of the people who comment on my videos are very polite and decent people. But, you know, I'm up for a debate on some of these things as well. It's all interesting. I find the whole thing's a learning process for me as well. There's loads I haven't covered. And so if there's any more that people want to know, yeah, get in touch on the comments. Thanks for watching and have a good day and week and year. See you later.